"She's our little family embarrassment," my son's new wife announced with a sweet, cutting smile. In that moment, I watched the shame flicker in my own son's eyes as he looked away from me. What she didn't know is that the glittering world she just married into was built on a secret I've kept for 15 years. She came to play for a fortune. She was about to find out I owned the entire game. The sound of champagne glasses clinked around me, a fragile, hollow noise. Lila, my son's new wife, turned to her parents. Her smile was perfect, practiced, and utterly predatory. "And this is Noah's mother," she announced, her voice dripping with a sweet, dismissive pity. "She lives a rather quiet life." Polite laughter rippled through their small, perfect circle. I felt my son, Noah, shift uncomfortably beside me. He didn't defend me. He just looked down. Some insults are not meant to be forgiven. They are meant to be remembered. I held my posture, smoothed my velvet dress, and met her father's gaze across the table. His name was Gregory Vance, a man whose ambition had always been larger than his bank account. His smile froze. The color drained from his face as recognition finally dawned in his eyes. He knew me, not as a quiet widow. They didn't know it yet, but the game had already begun. The silence of my apartment was a physical thing, pressing in after the noise of the wedding. I slipped off my shoes at the door, the cool hardwood a welcome relief. My fingers went to the pearl necklace, a family heirloom, and then to the small, intricate brooch pinned to my velvet dress. On the mantelpiece, a silver frame caught the dim city light. Thomas and me. We were in our old university lab, 25 years younger, buried in blueprints and half-empty coffee cups. He was explaining something, his hands alive with passion, and I was looking at him with a kind of adoration that time never managed to erase. That photo wasn't just a memory of two engineers in love. It was the birthplace of a ghost, the ghost of a fortune so large it had to be hidden away from the world, from our world, from our own son. Lila's words echoed in the quiet room. A rather quiet life. Did she have any idea what quiet really cost? Thomas wasn't just a brilliant man. He was a force of nature. I remember the nights fueled by cheap coffee and the electric thrill of being on the verge of something the world had never seen before. He would pace and sketch and then rewrite everything. The problem was medical imaging, the challenge of seeing the invisible sickness inside a human body. For him, it was personal. He'd lost his own mother to a cancer that was found too late. He was determined to give doctors a better pair of eyes. He wanted to give people more time. The result was a single, beautiful algorithm, a piece of code so revolutionary it could detect anomalies with near-perfect accuracy, years before conventional methods. It was our masterpiece. I still have the original code, scribbled on a series of napkins from a diner we loved. My thumb traced the familiar, cool lines of the brooch on my dress, the algorithm brooch. Thomas had it made for me the day the patent was finalized, its delicate silver lines tracing the core sequence of his code, a symbol of our shared creation, a secret worn in plain sight. The sale of that patent didn't just make us wealthy, it made us powerful beyond our wildest dreams. We were sitting in our small kitchen, the wire transfer confirmation glowing on a laptop screen, the number so long it looked like a mistake. I remember Thomas closing the laptop slowly. He looked at a picture of Noah, then just a boy, on the fridge. "We have to bury this, Ev," he had said, his voice deadly serious. "We can't let this money raise our son." "We have to." So we did. We created a life of comfortable modesty, a carefully constructed stage play. We told Noah we'd received a nice payout, enough to be secure. He never questioned it. He grew up valuing hard work, earning his own successes, proud of every single achievement. He became the man Thomas and I had always hoped he would be, honest, driven, good. We gave our son a good life. Not an easy one, But that night, Lila's perfect predatory smile kept replaying in my mind. She looked at our family not as something to join, but as something to acquire, an asset to be liquidated. And in her eyes, I was simply a liability to be managed, an old piece of furniture to be moved out of the way. Have you ever looked at your child's choice and felt a cold dread, a primal fear that they've made a mistake they can't yet see? I walked to the window, looking out over the Seattle skyline. The city lights glittered like a sea of scattered diamonds, a world of wealth and power that I moved through invisibly, a world the Vance family desperately wanted a piece of. My quiet life wasn't an accident. It was a promise I made to my husband. It was a fortress I built to protect my son. And Lila had just declared war on it. I touched the brooch one last time, its metal cool against my skin. Thomas always said that every complex problem has an elegant solution. My solution was about to begin. The doorbell cut through the afternoon quiet, a sharp, unwelcome sound. For a foolish second, my heart lifted. Maybe he'd come to talk, to understand. I opened the door. Noah stood there. But it was the way he stood. In the doorway, not quite in, not quite out. A stranger caught between two worlds, and I was on the wrong side of the threshold. The space between us felt like a mile of cold, hard floor. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He finally looked at me then, and his eyes were full of a cold anger I had never seen before, an anger sharpened by betrayal. "Why?" he asked. Just one word. It hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. He stepped inside but left the door open, a clear signal this was not a visit. It was an interrogation. He didn't take off his coat. He didn't move towards the kitchen where coffee was always waiting for him. He just stood there, a prosecutor in my own living room. "All those years, Mom," he began, his voice tight with a pain that tore through me. "All those years I watched you pinch pennies. I worked 2 jobs in college to afford that broken-down car I was so proud of. I saved for 5 years for the down payment on my house." He finally paced, back and forth, a caged animal. "I built my entire life on the values you and Dad taught me. Hard work, integrity, honesty." He stopped and faced me, his eyes blazing. "Was it all a lie? Was my struggle just some kind of sick joke for you? Watching your son stress over bills you could have paid with pocket change?" I listened. I nodded. I kept my hand still on the kitchen counter. Every word was a stone, and he was building a wall between us with them. I could hear Lila's voice in his questions, the carefully chosen phrases, the subtle poison that reframed my protection as deception. She had given him the words, but the pain was all his. My pain was watching him use them against me. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. I wanted to tell him everything, about his father's dream, about our promise, about the quiet burden of a fortune that could crush a young man's ambition. But I looked at his face, at the rigid set of his jaw, and I knew. He wasn't ready to hear my truth. He was here to speak his. And as a mother, I owed him that. "I'm sorry you're hurting, Noah," I said, and the words felt like dust in my mouth, small and useless against his inferno. He just shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You're sorry?" Lila's family, they may be a lot of things, but at least they're honest about who they are. He turned, his hand on the doorknob. "I don't even know who you are anymore." He left. The door clicked shut, a sound of absolute finality. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. It was filled with his accusations, filled with my failure. I sank onto a kitchen chair, the strength finally leaving my legs. And then my phone buzzed on the counter. The sound was violent in the stillness. I picked it up. An email notification glowed on the screen. From James Sullivan. Subject: urgent request, unusual activity. My thumb hovered over the screen. Lila wasn't just whispering poison in my son's ear. She was kicking at the foundations of my fortress. The game had begun. My apartment felt like a tomb. I picked up my phone, my thumb swiping to open the email from James. The words on the screen were stark, clinical, a diagnosis of a sickness I already felt in my bones. An hour later, I was in his office. The office was 40 floors above Seattle, all glass and chrome, a place where emotions were liabilities and numbers told the only truth that mattered. James Sullivan, my financial advisor for 20 years, a man who knew more about my life than anyone besides Thomas, stood before a wall-sized screen. He kept his voice even, professional, but I could see the concern in the tightness around his eyes. The intrusion attempts on the holding corporation's servers were amateur, Evelyn. Easily blocked, he said, pointing to a string of code. This is what worries me. He clicked his mouse. A new window opened, and there it was, projected in cold black letters, a ghost of Lila's ambition. Piercing the corporate veil liabilities, estate dispute lawyers, Seattle, Hartman, Thomas, patent sale, public record. My breath caught. It was a digital map of her greed, a blueprint for a war I never wanted to fight. The woman my son loved was a stranger, a predator in a white wedding dress. The grief from Noah's visit was still a physical ache in my chest, a hollow space where his trust used to be. But now, something else was crystallizing around that ache. Something cold, something hard as steel. "She's been busy," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. James nodded, his expression grim. "This isn't just idle curiosity, Evelyn. She's building a legal case. The lawyers she's been researching, Vance Peters and Associates, they don't just send letters. They burn houses down, legally speaking. They specialize in proving that private assets are actually marital property." He kept talking. I heard the words: litigation, discovery, asset seizure. He was describing a storm gathering on the horizon. He was explaining the rules of a game she had started. She mistook my silence for weakness. I thought of Noah's face, twisted in anger and confusion. I thought of his words, sharpened by Lila's whispers. She hadn't just attacked my fortune. She had attacked my son. She had taken my love for him and reframed it as the ultimate betrayal. She had turned my greatest act of protection into my greatest crime. A quiet, clean anger began to burn through the fog of my pain. It was an anger that didn't need to scream. It just needed to act. "What are our defensive options, James?" I asked, my eyes fixed on the screen. He started outlining a strategy: legal firewalls, moving assets, preparing for a long, ugly fight that could drag my name, Thomas's name, and Noah's name through the mud for years. A fight that would expose the very secret I had spent a lifetime protecting. A fight designed to bleed me dry, emotionally and financially. A war of attrition, her war, her rules. I held up a hand. He stopped talking. The silence in that high-rise office felt absolute. I stood up, walked to the vast window, and looked down at the city below. All those lights, all those lives, all moving according to a set of rules. It was time to introduce a new one. "Forget defense, James," I said, turning back to him, my voice leaving no room for argument. "This is no longer about protection. This is about removal." I picked up my phone. I hit dial. I put it on speaker. "James," I said, my eyes locked on his, "I want a full offensive workup on the Vance family. Everything. Every credit card statement, every desperate loan, every shell company Gregory has ever created to hide his failures. I want to know the name of the tailor who made his suits and how long it's been since he could afford to pay him." "Evelyn," James started, a note of caution in his voice. "Don't miss a single receipt," I finished. She wanted to audit my life. I was about to foreclose on hers. The investigation didn't take weeks. It took 72 hours. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, a single thick binder delivered by James himself. It made a heavy, final sound when he placed it on my dining table, the same table where I once helped Noah with his homework. "It's worse than we thought, Evelyn," was all he said before he left. I opened the cover. I started to read. I didn't stop for hours. Page after page, I saw a story not of wealth, but of a carefully curated illusion of it. A performance funded by desperation and high-interest loans. Gregory Vance's prestigious architectural firm was a beautiful house of cards built on a mountain of debt. There was a second mortgage on their sprawling estate. Credit cards for luxury brands were maxed out, paid just enough each month to keep the illusion alive. The car they drove to the wedding was leased. Lila's designer dress was likely bought on a credit line he could no longer afford. They weren't just living beyond their means. They were living in a fantasy. And then I found it, tucked inside a loan application from the previous year, a familiar name, one of my own venture capital funds. Gregory had tried to get funding from me once before, through an anonymous portal. We had rejected him. His financial statements were a sea of red flags. His business was already a sinking ship, long before I stepped in to buy the wreckage. His failure wasn't my doing, it was entirely his own. He hadn't just been hiding his failure from the world, he'd been trying to hide it from himself. They judged my quiet life from a house they didn't own. As the afternoon sun slanted across the floor, my phone chimed. A new email from James. No subject line, just a single encrypted audio file attached. My final piece of evidence. I put on my headphones, the world shrinking to a single point of focus. I pressed play. The sound of clinking glasses, laughter, a conversation from a restaurant recorded by one of James's investigators, and then Lila's voice, clear and confident. "He's a good man," she was saying, speaking of my son. "Stable, kind, but the real prize is the mother." A friend laughed. "The quiet one? What's she got?" Lila's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, filled with triumph. "She's sitting on a gold mine, honey. Thomas Hartman's patents. She's the golden ticket, you understand? I just have to play the part of the devoted daughter-in-law long enough to cash it." I listened to her lay out her strategy, her plans to declare my assets as marital influence, her intention to slowly, carefully take control. I felt no anger, no shock, just the quiet, final click of a lock falling into place. She wasn't a wolf in sheep's clothing. She was just a wolf. I took off the headphones. The silence of the room returned, but it was different now. It was the calm of a battlefield right before the final charge. And as if on cue, my phone began to ring. The screen lit up with her name, Lila. I let it ring 3 times. I took a slow breath. I answered, "Evelyn, darling." Her voice was sickly sweet, dripping with fake affection. I was just thinking, with everything that's come out, perhaps it's time we all sat down for a proper family meeting. To clear the air, I looked at the open binder on my table, at the pages of debt, at the transcript of her betrayal. "Of course, Lila," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "A family meeting sounds wonderful." She had just built her own cage. Now she was asking me to come and lock the door. We met in a place of my choosing, a glass-walled conference room on the top floor of a downtown law firm that had my family on retainer for 30 years. It was neutral ground, which meant it was my ground. The view of the Seattle harbor was stunning. No one was looking at it. Lila sat across from me, flanked by her father, Gregory, and a lawyer named Mark Vance, whose suit cost more than my car. She was playing the part of the concerned wife, her face a mask of gentle worry. Gregory was visibly nervous, his fingers drumming a frantic, silent rhythm on the polished mahogany table. And next to me, silent and tense, sat my son, Noah. He was the reason we were here. He was the prize, Vance began. His voice was smooth, practiced, the sound of expensive threats wrapped in legal courtesy. "Evelyn," he started, as if we were old friends, "we're here to find a path forward for the family. In light of recent revelations about your considerable and previously undisclosed assets, Lila is naturally concerned. We've drafted a proposal for a family trust." He slid a glossy, leather-bound folder across the table. The sound was a soft, confident whisper. the family trust proposal, the opening move in their endgame. I didn't touch it. I let the silence stretch, a tactic I learned from Thomas. Let your opponent fill the void. They always reveal more than they intend. Lila took the cue. "Mom," she said, her voice catching with practiced emotion, "this isn't about taking anything. It's about transparency, about protecting this family's future, protecting Noah's future." I looked at my son. He was watching me, his eyes a mixture of confusion, anger, and a sliver of hope. Hope that I was the monster Lila had painted me to be, or hope that I wasn't. I couldn't tell. That was the deepest cut of all. I finally moved. I reached down to the leather satchel at my feet. I retrieved a binder. It was not glossy. It was thick, black, and functional. I placed it on the table with a heavy, definitive thud that made Gregory Vance flinch. "Thank you for your proposal, Mark," I said, my voice even and calm. "But I believe you're working with incomplete information." I brought some light reading for you. All I slid 4 identical copies across the table. One for Lila, one for Gregory, one for their lawyer, and one for my son. This isn't a negotiation. It's an education. I watched them open the first page. There was no sound for a full minute except the soft rustle of paper. I didn't need to narrate. The numbers told the story. Page after page of debt consolidation reports, high-interest loans, a second mortgage on their family estate, leveraged to the breaking point, a list of assets, all leased, all illusions. I watched Gregory's face turn ashen. He knew these numbers. He had been running from them for years. I watched the lawyer's smooth composure crack as he realized his clients hadn't just hidden assets from me. They had hidden their insolvency from him. But I only truly cared about one reaction. I watched Noah. I saw his eyes scan the pages, his brow furrowing in confusion, and then dawning comprehension. He looked from the pages to Gregory, then to Lila, as if seeing them for the first time. The foundation of the powerful, wealthy family he had married into was crumbling to dust right before his eyes. "It seems your family's financial situation is more quiet than mine, Lila," I said softly. Before she could form a response, I reached into my bag again. I retrieved a small digital recorder. I pressed play. Lila's voice filled the silent room, confident, conspiratorial, triumphant. "She's sitting on a gold mine, honey. Thomas Hartman's patents. She's the golden ticket, you understand? I just have to play the part of the devoted daughter-in-law long enough to cash it." I didn't look at Lila. I didn't look at her father or her lawyer. I only looked at Noah. I watched the last bit of color drain from his face. I watched him finally, truly, see the woman he had married. The shame I had seen in his eyes at the wedding was nothing compared to the profound, soul-deep disillusionment that washed over him now. He slowly turned his head to look at Lila. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her mask was gone. For the first time, I saw her for what she was, a desperate, frightened girl who had made a terrible bet and lost. This is out of context," the lawyer stammered, shuffling his papers. I held up my hand for silence. "Actually," I said, my voice calm and clear, "it's all about context." My fingers went to the silver brooch on my dress, the one Thomas had designed for me, the foreshadowing detail from Act 2 now taking center stage. I looked directly at Gregory. "This brooch is a model of the algorithm my husband created, the one that generated my entire fortune. It's a beautiful piece of code. It's designed to find hidden patterns, to predict outcomes from complex data sets." I leaned forward slightly. "It's brilliant at predicting the collapse of poorly managed systems that are over-leveraged and destined for failure. Like your company was, Gregory, a year before I acquired it, when you tried to get funding from one of my venture capital funds and were rejected." Gregory Vance looked like he had been struck by lightning. The final connection was made. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a checkmate. I let the moment hang. Then I delivered the final terms. This meeting is over. Here is my one and only offer. My voice was no longer calm. It was cold. I will wire $10 million to an account of your choosing, Lila. In exchange, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement and annul your marriage to my son. You will walk away from this family and never look back. The lawyer started to speak. Now wait a minute. This is not a negotiation, I cut him off. This is a cleanup. You have 24 hours to accept. If you refuse, I will not only allow your family's creditors to bankrupt you, I will personally finance the lawsuits against you for attempting to defraud my family. The choice is yours. I stood up. I looked at my son, whose eyes were now clear, filled with a terrible, painful understanding. I had protected him after all, not by hiding him from the world, but by finally showing it to him. The silence that followed was more expensive than $10 million. It was the price of their surrender. The papers were signed the next morning. No ceremony, just the quiet scratch of a pen sealing a $10 million silence. The wire transfer was instant. Lila was gone by noon. A clean, quiet amputation from our lives. After she left, Noah and I sat in my apartment for a long time, the afternoon light streaming through the windows. There were no apologies needed, no grand speeches. The truth had been laid bare on that mahogany table, and its weight was enough. He just reached across the space between us and placed his hand over mine. It was enough. Healing isn't an event. It's a process. It began with that shared silence. It continued with a simple cup of coffee the following week. Then a long walk by the water where we talked about his father. We talked about everything but what had happened. We didn't need to. One Sunday, months later, I saw him laugh, a real, unburdened laugh, and I knew. We were going to be okay. I didn't rebuild my quiet life exactly as it was. I gave it a new purpose. My fortune was no longer a secret to be guarded, but a legacy to be shared. I established the Thomas Hartman Foundation, a private fund for brilliant young medical researchers who had the passion, but not the resources, to change the world. True wealth is not what you keep, it's what you give away. Last week, I visited one of the labs we fund. I stood behind a glass wall, watching a young woman no older than my son peer into a microscope, her face illuminated with the fierce glow of discovery. She was seeing the invisible, just as Thomas had dreamed of. She was giving people more time. I had spent years hiding a fortune to protect one person. Now I understood the only way to truly honor my husband's legacy was to give it away to help build the future for many. That is the only kind of wealth that truly lasts. Your true worth is the legacy you build. Thank you so much for being here and holding space for this story. Every family has its own complex chapters, and if you feel comfortable sharing, I would be honored to read your story in the comments. And of course, I hope you'll subscribe to hear more.